So we will begin the walkthrough with a review of the budget spreadsheet with the committee's fiscal analyst, Joe Harney. Mr. Harney, please identify yourself for the record and proceed.
Chair Hausman, Joe Harney, House Fiscal. I will be sharing my screen here in just a second. I'm going to pause for 2 seconds to make sure that is the case.
We can see it.
Great. Before I begin the walkthrough of Article 1, the Appropriations article, I'd like to orient members to 3 additional items in your packets, in addition to the delete everything amendment for House File 4376. So those two spreadsheets were included in your packets. One is dated April 4th, 2022 with a timestamp of 12:18 p.m. This represents the February forecast base for Minnesota Housing Finance, the governor's position in the governor's budget bill, and the House position in the DE amendment. For the sake of clarity and visibility, I will be presenting a second spreadsheet, which is just a pared down version of the main one, dated April 4th, 2022 at 12:20 p.m. This, again, just a pared down version with columns F here and G here representing the House position for the omnibus bill. The third and final item to draw your attention to is an A5 author's amendment that I understand the chair will offer tomorrow in committee. This A5 author's amendment impacts the appropriations article in 2 places that is reflected on this spreadsheet, and that is a adjustment to the challenge program appropriation in the tails and an adjustment to the Department of Human Rights base appropriation for House File 8835. Now with that, members, I'm going to begin by walking through the change items, starting with line 30, the Economic Development and Housing Challenge Program line here represents the House position to increase the base in fiscal year 23 by $20 million, and in the tails each fiscal year by $17,117,000. The new base for the Housing Challenge Program in the current biennium would then be $48,650,000, and in the tails, the base would be $60,084,000. Moving on to the second page of the walkthrough spreadsheet, I would draw your attention to line 33. Line 33 is a deposit in the Housing Trust Fund for rental assistance. That amount increases the Housing Trust Fund base by $10 million in the current biennium and $20 million in the next. I'm going to hop up again here to show you that on the current base activity. Line 6 here represents the new base for the Housing Trust Fund and rental assistance in the current biennium and the tails. Hopping back down once again, line 34 represents an increase to the base for homework starts with home. That is $10 million in the current biennium and $20 million in the next biennium. On line 7 above, that increase to the base is $13.5 million in the current biennium and makes a new base of $23.5 million in the next. Line 35 is an increase to the Family Homelessness Prevention and Assistance Program. That amount is $14 million in 23 and $20 million in the tails. That increase can be seen to the base on line 9. Next, there is a one-time appropriation on line 38 to local housing trust fund grants for $7 million. On line 40, there is a base appropriation of $5 million to strengthen the supportive housing model. The House position is for $5 million again in fiscal year 23 and a total of $10 million in the tails. Next, there's a one-time appropriation on line 41 for the flexible financing of capital costs. That amount is $5 million in fiscal year 23. Moving to bills heard and laid over by the committee here, on line 43, there is a as amended community stabilization program created per House File 443, excuse me. That amount on line 43 is a one-time appropriation of $100 million in fiscal year 23 and an $80 million appropriation in the tails as base. Drawing your attention then to line 44, lead safe homes. This is a one-time appropriation for $2 million in fiscal year 23. And then line 45, Department of Human Rights is receiving a base appropriation of $383,000 in the current biennium, and that extends into the tails. Again, this amount is amended with the A5 authors amendment to the DE for House File 4376. And then to round out the change items here, lines 46 through 49 represent one-time funding. Line 46 is House File 3287, the mediation grant program, one-time funding for $425,000. Line 27 is House File 1635 as amended, the home ownership education program. That is a one-time appropriation for $1 million. Line 48 is House File 4269, the first generation home buyers assistance program. That's a one-time appropriation for $50 million. I will note that this one-time appropriation is available until the end of fiscal year 25. Lastly, Madam Chair, members, on line 49 is House File 3837, Section 3, Manufactured Home Lending Grants. This is a one-time appropriation from the general fund for $5,192,000. To round out the change items to the appropriations to the department, to the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency, in total, in the current biennium, there's $230 million added, and in the tails, $185,000 added. Of that 185 million, excuse me, I will note that needs to be less than the appropriations to the Department of Human Rights, and that's a technical correction that I will make for the committee tomorrow. Madam Chair, with that, I will stop sharing my screen. I'll stand for questions for a moment before we pass it over to my colleagues in House Research.
Thank you, Mr. Harney. Members, are there questions of Mr. Harney on the spreadsheet that he has just reviewed for us? I'll give a minute or two to see hands up. I don't see any questions at this point. So thank you very much for walking through the spreadsheet. We'll now move on to the walkthrough of the omnibus bill language in House File 4376. Members, questions for staff will be taken once their walkthrough of the bill has concluded to kind of allow them to give the full picture. And we'll begin with Article 1 with Justin Cope in House Research. Mr. Cope, please identify yourself for the record and proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Justin Cope of House Research. And Article 1 is the appropriations article, Madam Chair. So I do think Mr. Harney may have covered that in sufficient detail that we could move on to Article 2 if you'd like.
Yes, please.
So Article 2 modifies existing MHFA programs and establishes some new grant and pilot programs. Sections 1 and 2 of Article 2 amend the Homework Starts with Home program. Currently, only families with school-age children are eligible for the program. With these changes, families with minor children would also be eligible. Section 3 establishes the Lead Safe Homes grant program so that nonprofits and political subdivisions could receive grants to provide lead testing and lead remediation in rental housing. Section 4 amends the law governing housing infrastructure bonds. It would add a new proposed use that would allow HIBs to be used to acquire, rehabilitate, and construct housing affordable to households at or below 50% of area median income. And it would allow up to 20% of the units in senior housing to serve individuals of any age with intellectual or developmental disabilities. This would also require that for applicants seeking HIBs, the agency prioritize proposed HIB projects that would provide housing affordable to households below 30% of area median income. And it would require multifamily housing funded by HIBs to include accessible and sensory accessible units. Section 5 would authorize MFHA to issue up to $400 million in housing infrastructure bonds. Section 6 would establish a grant program to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing. Section 7 would establish a grant program to improve supportive housing for persons who are either at risk of homeless or who have experienced homelessness. Section 8 would amend the law governing covenants on housing. Currently, there's a 30-year limit on the duration that those covenants could last, with some limited exceptions. This would expand the list of exceptions to include affordability covenants required by government entities. Section 9 would establish the Minnesota Stable Housing Mediation Grant Program, which would fund landlord-tenant mediation services. Section 10 would establish a pilot project, which would issue a grant to the Midwest Minnesota Community Development Corporation to operate a grant program for first-generation home buyers. Section 11 would establish an MFHA pilot program that would award grants to nonprofits and to manufactured home park residents that would help them to purchase their manufactured home parks either as cooperatives or to form resident-owned manufactured home park communities. And the last section in this article, section 12, would establish an MHFA pilot program that would issue grants to local housing trust funds. Those would be matching grants intended to incentivize local investment in local housing trust funds. And then moving on to Article 3. Article 3 is the MHFA Technical and Policy Bill, HF437, without that bill's articles included. So Section 1 simply corrects a typographical error, replacing ensure with ensure. Section 2 specifies that agency loans for rehabilitation may finance the rehabilitation or the addition of a detached accessory dwelling unit. Section 3 would allow MHFA to use any funds authorized by Chapter 462A to fund either Indian tribes or tribally designated housing entities. Section 4 would require MHFA to prioritize use of any appropriations under Chapter 462A to serve households affected by housing disparities. Sections 5, 6, and 7 correct typographical errors, replacing insure with ensure. Section 8 removes a requirement from the Homework Starts with Home program that applicants for grants need sponsorship by the county in which the applicant is located. Section 9 again corrects a typographical error, replacing insure with ensure. Section 10 specifies language regarding the agency's debt ceiling, specifying that only general obligation bonds count toward the debt ceiling. Section 11 would authorize MHFA to issue refunding bonds to refund nonprofit housing bonds when the debt service on the refunding bond would be lower on the debt service of the original nonprofit housing bond. Section 12 would require Minnesota Management and Budget to transfer the amount necessary to pay the debt service on any nonprofit housing bonds that were issued to refund a prior nonprofit housing bond. Section 12 amends some definitions. It removes the income requirement for the definition of senior, adds a new definition of senior household that includes an income requirement, and then conforms the definition of senior housing with those changes. Section 14 would authorize the agency to use HIBs to replace federally assisted rental housing. And it would amend prioritization requirements for senior housing, both to conform that subdivision with the changes in the definitions, and to remove a requirement that there be a service plan that was approved by local agencies and entities. Section 15 would authorize MHFA to issue HIBs to refund previously issued HIBs. And sections 16 and 17 would require the Minnesota Management and Budget Offices to transfer the amount necessary to pay the debt service on any refunding HIB bonds. Section 18 would add counties to the list of eligible grantees of the Workforce and Affordable Homeownership Development Program. Section 19 would amend the definition of eligible project area for the Workforce Housing Development Program to include tribal reservations. And it would also clarify that eligible areas are areas that are outside of metropolitan counties. Section 20 applies the requirement of the Workforce Housing Development Program, which previously only applied to cities, to all eligible project areas. And it also expands the list of entities that can match a grant to include federally recognized tribes. And last, section 21 amends the 2021 appropriation to the agency, which currently only allows use to acquire and rehabilitate federally assisted rented housing, to also allow it to be used to replace federally assisted rental housing. And that concludes Article 3.
And I think we're turning to Mary Mullen, a legislative analyst from the House Research Department, for the next article. Ms. Mullen, welcome, and please identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Chair and members. It's Mary Mullen from House Research. I'm going to be walking through Article 4, which relates to landlord tenant law. In the DE2, this would be at the top of page 33. The first, second, and third sections allow new language to be added to the Minnesota Human Rights Act, and it prohibits discrimination in housing against an individual who's receiving public assistance. Sections 4 and 5 make changes to when the court can grant an eviction expungement. Section 6 prohibits landlords from imposing ongoing fees that don't relate to a service provided by the landlord, and then impose a penalty for violating that section. Section 7 removes a provision from existing law that allows a tenancy at will to be terminated with 14 days notice. A tenancy at will is usually without a written lease, and the tenant would be required to get notice that's as long as their periodic rental is normally. Section 8 at the top of page 36 provides specific heat levels that are needed in a residential unit during the winter. Section 9 clarifies notice and time requirements for a landlord to enter a rental unit. And Section 10 changes the existing penalty when a landlord enters a rental unit without the proper notice. Section 11 allows a tenant to terminate their lease with 2 months notice for specific health-related issues. Section 12 prohibits a landlord from filing an action or proceeding on an action that's when one's already been filed for an eviction against a tenant for not paying the rent, when the tenant's applied for rental assistance and is waiting for a determination on the assistance. Section 13 requires the landlord to give 14 days notice before filing an eviction for non-payment of rent, and it keeps the eviction filing private until the court has issued an order in the case. Section 14 allows unlawful exclusion cases. This is when a tenant's been locked out, to be brought with the same filing fee as a conciliation court case. Section 15 at the bottom of page 45 in the DE. This section enumerates the reasons a tenant is allowed to file an action for emergency repairs in their rental unit. And then section 16 provides an updated procedure for filing those emergency repairs requests. And section 16 allows the tenant to pay the conciliation court filing fee for those same emergency repair cases. And that is everything for the landlord tenant article.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions for Mr. Cope or Ms. Mullen after their walkthrough? Just giving a little bit of time to see if any hands up. I don't see any hands raised. Obviously, you the three of you did very clear presentations, and thanks to all three of you for your incredible and diligent work in putting this bill together.